The radio called it cortical necrosis virus, which was a clean way of saying a man was eating a cop on live television. I'd seen it up close in a Chicago emergency room 2 days before, a stockbroker trying to chew through a security guard's Kevlar vest, so the grainy footage from a news helicopter didn't shock me. I turned the knob until the voice dissolved into static, leaving only the sound of the rental car's wipers fighting the Oregon rain. My GPS showed 1 mile to the destination. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. This was the last place on earth I ever wanted to be. My half-brother Kabir opened the door before I could knock. He looked thinner than I remembered, his face all weary eyes and dark stubble. Paint stains colored the cuffs of his flannel shirt. He just stood there for a moment, letting the cold rain blow in around me. Inside, the house smelled of pine cleaner and something else, something metallic and sterile like a hospital. My father's house. I stepped past him and dropped my wet bag on the floor, pulling the legal documents from my coat. I thrust the papers at him. Sign these. The lumber company's offer is good for another 48 hours. He didn't take them. He just pointed a stained finger at the television mounted on the wall. A city was burning. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Martial law, declared in Portland. Whatever we do, we have to do it together, jury. That's the only way we get through this." I looked at his outstretched hand, then at his pleading face. The expression was one I recognized from our childhood, the one he used right before our father's temper broke. I turned away without a word and walked to a stack of boxes by the fireplace. I picked up the one marked financials. The tension was a physical thing in the room as we worked. I sorted through deeds and account statements while he packed away our father's personal effects. Every object was a landmine. I uncovered a crate of MREs and a dismantled rifle, and for a second I was a child again, my hands aching and cold as I learned to clean the weapon in the dark. Kabir saw me freeze. "He was just trying to protect us," Kabir said, his voice tight. "He was a paranoid fanatic." "You left," he shot back. "I had to stay here and learn every circuit, every filter, every goddamn line of code in this prison, just to keep him from thinking the whole world was ending every time a light flickered." He ran a hand over a strange panel on the wall, a series of heavy manual switches and levers instead of a digital screen. "Dad called this the oh shit switch, said if we ever used it, we were already dead." On a nearby table, a cardboard box was labeled ARC, Operational Logs. It was full of digital videocassettes. On the television, a pale-faced president was speaking from a secure location, declaring a national state of emergency. His voice was tinny and distant. Then the screen flickered once and went to black static. The lights in the house went out with it. A single, high-pitched whine started up from the server rack in the corner before it too went silent. The house was completely dark, swallowed by the forest. A deep mechanical roar suddenly filled the property, vibrating through the floorboards. The backup generator. I ran to the wall of security monitors as they flickered to life, powered by the new source. I expected to see a looter, maybe a desperate neighbor. My blood went cold. On every screen, from every direction, the woods were vomiting up figures. They were not running. They were shambling, dozens of them. Then 100, all moving silently through the rain toward the sound of the generator. "We have to get to the truck," I said, my voice flat. I was already calculating the odds. Low, but not zero. "No." Kabir was shaking his head, his face white. "We'll never make it." He grabbed a heavy, skeletonized key from a hook by the door and dragged me toward the wine cellar. He fumbled with a lock on a thick steel door I'd always assumed led to a crawl space. "It's a bunker." He called it the Ark. I had to help him maintain it. "Trading one trap for another," I muttered, but I followed. A crash echoed from the living room upstairs, the sound of shattering glass. Then another, closer, from the kitchen at the top of the cellar stairs. A shadow fell across the opening, a misshapen silhouette against the gray afternoon light. I pulled the pistol from the waistband at my back. Kabir worked the complex lock, his hands shaking. The first one reached the bottom of the stairs, a woman in a tattered floral dress, her jaw slack. I fired once. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. She dropped. A second figure appeared behind her, a man in a mail carrier's uniform. I shot him too. The heavy door swung inward with a gasp of pressurized air. We scrambled inside, and Kabir threw his weight against the steel hatch. He spun the locking wheel, the thick bolts slamming home and cutting off the sounds of the dying world. The bunker was silent. The only noise was our ragged breathing. Emergency lights gave way to clean, bright overheads as the main power came online. It was a sterile, modern space with white walls and banks of computer monitors. Then one of the largest screens lit up with a familiar face. Our father, Jarrett Barr, looked out at us, his expression as severe in death as it had been in life. He began a pre-recorded speech, a rambling orientation to his life's work. I ignored him. My eyes were fixed on a smaller monitor to the side, the one displaying the life support systems. A column of green bars indicated air quality, water purity, and power reserves. But my attention was caught by a single line of text at the bottom. D-sign occupancy, 1. A small number next to it was already ticking down from a perfect 100.00%. I pointed. Kabir, what's the design occupancy for this bunker? He managed a weak, relieved smile, still catching his breath. 1. Dad built it for himself. My face turned to stone. Exactly. With 2 of us, the oxygen scrubbers and water recyclers would be overloaded. The air would become toxic, the water undrinkable. A timer appeared in the corner of Jarrett's video feed, stark red numbers against a black background. 90 days, W0 hours, W0 numbers, W0 numbers. This wasn't a home. It was an arena. The radio was on, and I knew my brother was a sentimental fool who would get us both killed. I saw the small green power light from the doorway of my quarters, a pinprick of defiant energy in the recycled twilight of the bunker's sleep cycle. For 30 days, I had maintained a rigid schedule of energy conservation, a draconian but necessary rationing of every single watt, because every watt was a fraction of a breath in the final equation. He had undone it for the sake of a ghost, for the imagined voice of a dead world. I walked into the main room and stood before the ham radio, its quiet electronics generating a negligible but infuriating drain on the system. I flicked the switch off. The next morning, over our measured portions of nutrient paste, I explained the logic to him again. I pointed to the main life support monitor, where the efficiency percentage had ticked down to 96. I explained how the geothermal generator, our father's pride, had a finite operational lifespan, and how every non-essential system accelerated its decay. I told him that listening for dead voices was an expenditure of oxygen we could not afford. He stirred his gray paste with a plastic spoon, his eyes fixed on the table. He said nothing, which was his preferred method of argument, a passive resistance that invited an emotional response I refused to give him. I finished my paste, cleaned my bowl, and returned to the command center. I took a roll of gaffer tape from a supply locker and taped over the radio's power switch. With a black marker, I wrote on the tape in clean, block letters, "Wasted energy, wasted air." We watched our father's video logs, not for entertainment, but for data. Jarrett Barr had documented every system, every contingency, his face on the monitor, a sterile mask of arrogant competence. Kabir saw the rantings of a sick man, but I saw instruction manuals. I absorbed his lessons on distrust, on the flawed variable of human connection. In one recording, he gestured proudly behind him at a schematic of the power system. Powered by the Earth itself, he boasted, his eyes alight with manic certainty. Geothermal. Rock solid. Unless you're stupid enough to try a hard reboot on the primary relay. The feedback loop would be noisy, could crack a foundation, a real bell ringer. He was speaking to me, the child who understood systems, not the artist who felt things. I filed the information away as another variable in the complex problem of my brother. That night, when the main lights dimmed, I saw the faint green glow from under the gaffer tape on the radio. He was still trying. By day 45, the life support monitor showed an efficiency of 89%, a rate of decay faster than my projections accounted for. I found the discrepancy in a secondary diagnostic screen, a small warning I had overlooked. Primary relay, stress 85%. The power was being rerouted, bled off from the main system in a way that put a critical strain on the generator. It was the radio. It was Kabir. I found him in the main room, headphones on, fiddling with the frequency dial. I ripped the headphones from his head. "What are you doing?" He flinched, his expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "There are people out there, Juri. I heard them. You are destabilizing the entire power grid." I pointed toward the command center. "Do you have any idea how unstable that relay is? You could bring the ceiling down on us. We can't just sit here and let the world die alone." His idealism was a pathogen. Before I could stop him, he was speaking into the microphone, his voice trembling with a pathetic, desperate hope. He had made contact with someone, a doctor with 2 children, he said, only a few miles away. They were trapped in a pharmacy basement, running out of food. I heard the woman's voice crackle back over the speaker, weak and filled with static. Over my furious objections, my logical assertions that any contact was an unacceptable risk, Kabir gave them the location of a small exterior service grate on the north side of the bunker. He planned to pass them a box of antibiotics from our medical stores. He believed this single act of charity would prove his worldview superior to mine. That connection could triumph over the cold calculus of survival. We watched them arrive on the exterior security camera. The monitor showed a grainy, monochrome image of a woman and 2 small figures huddled against the rain. They found the grate, a simple steel plate set into the concrete retaining wall. They were supposed to wait. Kabir was speaking to them over an external speaker, telling them to be patient while he retrieved the medicine. But they were desperate. The woman and the older child began pulling at the grate, then striking it with a rock they had found. The sound was a sharp, percussive banging in the silence of the forest. It was a dinner bell. The first of the ragged came from the trees, a lurching shape that moved with unnatural speed. Then 2 more. The woman on the screen screamed, a sound that was tinny and distant through the monitor speaker. Kabir was shouting into the microphone, useless words of encouragement. I watched as a dozen more infected swarmed the small clearing. The family was overwhelmed in seconds. The camera showed a chaotic flurry of movement, and then it was over. The horde remained, a writhing mass of bodies drawn by the sound, now clustered around the grate, scratching and clawing at the steel. The screaming on the monitor had stopped. One of the ragged, a man in the tattered remains of a flannel shirt, looked up. Its filmed-over eyes seemed to stare directly into the security camera lens, directly at us. I reached forward and turned off the screen. The command center was silent except for the low circulation of the air scrubbers. I looked at Kabir. His face was white, his mouth hanging open in horror. "Well," I said, my voice perfectly level, "you wanted to meet the neighbors." The weeks that followed were a quiet, suffocating war. The air quality worsened, a subtle change in pressure, a stale taste that coated the back of my throat. Kabir, shattered by a guilt I considered a tactical weakness, retreated into our father's personal logs. He found the recordings Jarrett made near the end, the ones where the arrogant engineer was gone, replaced by a lonely old man consumed by regret and paranoia. Kabir weaponized them. He began playing the logs over the bunker's intercom system, filling our sterile tomb with our father's broken voice, his pathetic ramblings about the daughter who abandoned him and the son who was a disappointment. It was a crude psychological attack, designed to needle at the emotions I had spent a lifetime suppressing. My retaliation was logical and precise. I changed the master passwords for the environmental controls and the nutrient synthesizer, locking him out of the systems that governed his air and his food. I sat in the command center and slammed my laptop shut, the new password set. From the main room, his voice came over the intercom, shaky but defiant. "You can't silence him, Juri." Another recording began to play, this one of our father weeping. Our conflict turned physical on day 72. I was alerted by a pressure drop warning from the water reclamation unit. I found Kabir in the main filtration nexus, a panel open, a wrench in his hand. He was trying to contaminate my personal water line, a desperate, clumsy act of sabotage. When he saw me, he swung the wrench. I dodged the blow easily. My entire childhood was a training exercise in reacting to sudden violence. He was slower, weaker, fueled by impotent rage. I closed the distance between us, deflected his arm, and drove my shoulder into his chest. He fell backward, hitting the concrete floor with a sound that echoed in the narrow corridor. The fight was over before it began. I pinned a gasping Kabir to the floor, my knee on his chest, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hatred. I held him there for a long moment, letting him feel my complete physical dominance, before I stood up and walked away without a word. The unspoken truce was broken. The siblings were gone, replaced by two organisms competing for a finite set of resources. On day 88, the bunker was dying. Red warning lights flashed on every console, a pulsing rhythm that matched the pounding in my head. The life support efficiency meter read 4%. The air was thick and heavy, each breath a conscious effort. Kabir was no longer just a liability, he was an irrational threat. He had proven he was willing to destroy us both to spite me. I had fully embraced my father's core tenet, the one truth that had governed his entire life. The only variable you can control is yourself. I walked to the master control terminal and entered a command string from Jarrett's most private logs, a contingency he had designed to protect the Ark from a compromised occupant. I triggered a full system lockout. The heavy steel door to the command center slid shut with a final booming thud. A series of magnetic locks engaged along the frame, each one a deafening click that sealed my world from his. On the other side, a single red light would now be illuminated on the control panel, displaying the words, "System, lockout, engaged." I knew he was pounding on the steel, but the door was soundproof. The air in his lungs would already feel like fire. I watched him on the security monitor for the main corridor. He clawed at the door for a minute, then slumped against it, gasping. He was defeated. It was the optimal solution. Then I saw him remember something. His eyes widened. He pushed himself off the door and staggered down the corridor, out of the camera's view. I knew where he was going. He was going to the emergency maintenance panel near the primary generator. He was going for our father's ultimate, insane countermeasure, the Sovereign Mandate, a full system reboot designed to counter a hostile takeover of the command center, a protocol that would cause a massive power surge, temporarily disabling every electronic lock for 60 seconds. Jarrett's log entry on it was clear. You use this, and you're already dead. The lights on my console flickered. The monitor showing the corridor went black. Then every light in the command center went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. The only illumination came from the red emergency warnings, casting long, bloody shadows across the room. One by one, I heard the magnetic locks on the command center door disengage with a series of loud, metallic snaps. He had done it. He pulled the lever. A low, powerful charging sound began to issue from the walls around me, the sound of the entire bunker rebooting from a cold start. Maybe our father was right. He had already killed us both. The klaxon was a physical assault, a high, piercing shriek that vibrated through the floor plates into my teeth. A synthesized female voice, cold and without inflection, followed the sound. Sovereign Mandate. I nidiated. Warning, power surge imminent. All magnetic, locks disengaging. I spun around from the dead console just as the heavy command center door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Kabir stood in the frame, a dark shape against the flickering red emergency lights of the corridor, his chest rising and falling in ragged, desperate pulls. He had chosen to kill us quickly instead of slowly. He stumbled past me into the main living area, his focus absolute, and I knew where he was going. We were both moving through an atmosphere as thick as water, our lungs burning with the effort. In the center of the room was the primary environmental control station, a tall metal panel our father had built to withstand a direct impact. A single section of it glowed, a small protected flip cover labeled Manual Life Supportee Reboot. It was the system's heart, and Kabir intended to rip it out. I moved to block him, planting my feet between him and the panel, my own breath coming in shallow, painful bursts. My voice was a dry rasp. Don't. The surge will wipe the archives. He looked at me, his eyes wild in the pulsing red light. He was beyond reason, a cornered animal fighting for its next breath. Living for 5 more minutes is not a plan, I gasped, trying to force logic into a situation that had none. Being the smartest corpse in the cemetery is not a victory, he screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged. All my training, all my discipline was a distant memory, erased by oxygen deprivation. His attack was clumsy but desperate, and he drove me back against the cold steel of the console. We grappled, our hands slipping on the worn fabric of each other's clothes. It was a pathetic, vicious struggle, a battle of 2 weakening organisms. My limbs felt heavy and unresponsive, and he used his weight to twist me around, slamming my back into the panel. I felt the sharp edge of the override's protective cover dig into my spine. He pinned me there, his forearm pressed against my throat, cutting off the little air I could get. His other hand fumbled with the latch on the cover. I saw the muscles in his jaw clench as he finally flipped it open, revealing a single, heavy black lever. His hand closed around it. He was going to pull it. He was going to erase everything, all the data, all the schematics, every last piece of our father's work that might provide a path forward. He paused, his knuckles white on the lever, his whole body trembling with the strain. He looked down at me, and in his eyes I saw a terrifying reflection of my own cold logic. He was executing the optimal solution for his survival at my expense. At the same moment, I felt his hesitation, a flicker of something that was not pragmatism, and I understood that my rigid system of control had completely failed. My mind, starved for oxygen, made a final frantic connection, pulling together fragments from our father's video logs, the geothermal generator, the unstable primary relay. A hard reboot. The surge, I choked out, the words tearing at my throat. The primary relay. It will not just wipe the data. He stared down at me, his face a mask of confusion. It will overload the geothermal generator. I forced the words out. A massive seismic pulse. An echo. Understanding dawned on his face, a slow wave of horror that replaced the desperate rage. We both knew our father's term for it. The sound tax. Pulling that lever was not a reset, it was a broadcast. A deep, powerful boom that would radiate through the earth. A dinner bell for every single one of the ragged, for miles in every direction. Our father had designed the perfect trap. He had given us a switch that promised life but delivered only a faster death, forcing the winner of his sick game to unknowingly execute themselves and their prize. The fight drained out of him. His arm loosened from my throat, and he let go of the lever as if it had burned him. He scrambled back, away from me, away from the panel, stumbling to the far side of the room. We stared at each other across the space, 2 enemies who had just seen the true face of our jailer. The reboot lever, our false idol, sat exposed in its housing. The klaxon stopped, plunging the bunker into a silence that was more terrifying than the noise. My own ragged breathing was loud in my ears. I broke the silence, my voice a dry whisper. Okay. So that is not an option. We have, at our current consumption rate, 14 minutes of air. My mind was already working, discarding the failed strategy and moving to the next. The new problem was not him versus me. It was us versus the clock. Kabir's gaze drifted past me to the ham radio on the communications desk. His idealism was gone, burned away and replaced by something harder, something more real. A message, then, he said, his voice quiet. We cannot survive, but the data can. We moved without speaking, our actions finally synchronized by a single, shared purpose. My fingers flew across the keyboard of the power distribution terminal, executing a radical rerouting protocol I had theorized, but never dared to attempt. I sacrificed every non-essential system, shunting all remaining power from the lights, the sensors, and the reserve batteries directly into the CO2 scrubbers. The red emergency lights flickered and died, leaving us in near total darkness. The life support monitor, which had been blinking a fatal red, stabilized to a steady, hopeful amber. We had not saved ourselves, but we had bought ourselves hours. In the gloom, Kabir powered up the ham radio. He worked quickly, not searching for voices but preparing a compressed data burst. He transmitted the bunker's exact coordinates, a summary of our father's unpublished research on the viral pathology of CNV, and the full technical schematics for the bunker's atmospheric water reclamation system. It was a message in a bottle, cast into a dead ocean. We huddled together under a single wool blanket on the floor of the main room. The only light came from the dim green glow of the single, barely functioning life support monitor. The air was thin and frigid, but it was breathable. On a security screen that still drew a trickle of power, a silent, grainy image showed the world outside our tomb. The horde of the ragged, the ones my brother had summoned weeks ago, kept their vigil at the hatch, a writhing, patient mass. Our future was an unwritten page, but our survival for this moment was a shared condition. We were no longer our father's children, fighting over a poisoned inheritance. We were just a brother and a sister, in the dark, waiting for the dawn.